good model is going to first start with a good impression and then a good pour. So if your impression already has concerns in it, maybe you have some voids or some tearing or something, then when you pour it, it's going to be more obvious and it's going to remain in your model when you do it. So just kind of, and sometimes you just have to pour it and see what it looks like too, because sometimes when you look at the impression, you're like, sometimes just pour it and see what it looks like. So how are people doing kind of with getting models? Are you getting some in your drawers or kind of working towards that yet? All right.
I'm excited to trim.
So just know on your sheets what you need to get out for your armentarium. It's kind of all over the place in this, but ideally just make sure you have everything out. Don't worry about, so this is a wax bite. You're gonna worry about that more when you don't have a perfect set of teeth. The great thing about your typodonts, their occlusion is nice and normal. But when you start having patients come in or each other, just know they're going to fit together differently than these nice, wonderful typodonts that you have. So when you first have your models, so you have your upper and your lower, you're going to be looking for a couple of things. Ideally, when you pour it and you invert it onto your base, have the tray handle parallel to the countertop. Now, if you seated, the posterior, the anterior, a little bit more than the other, even having the handle parallel to the counter isn't going to fix that. So look and see, first of all, if it sits on the counter okay. So now if you look at this one, none of the teeth are even hitting on the counter. So just take pliers, and it's in the top drawer over there. Get off this back portion first. Make sure you always have safety glasses on, and just kind of nip away at it. Because you want to make sure that you're first able to get the dentition to rest down on it. Okay, so that's pretty good. Another thing you're going to look for, ideally, boat anchors, this thick or even thicker, are easier to work with. If you have one that's too thin, your pancake thing, you're going to need to add a base to it. So it's easy to do. You can do it at any point. Just take a lab knife, also out of the cupboard, just score it up really hard. Lots of scoring, soak the model, just the base of it. You don't need to soak the anatomy part of it. Pour up your base. Make sure you have a nice thick base to start with. Then another thing you want to look at before you do anything else, if it doesn't fit within here, let's say it's big on the sides, you're going to have to trim that down first of all, just so at least it fits in there. So if it carried out to the sides, you'd want to just come to the trimmer, and we'll go over the trimmer. So once you're going to decide to start trimming, a couple things. Get a couple of bowls, and you're going to soak your models, just the base of them. So you're going to have the teeth facing up. So I'm going to soak those, and then we're just going to go over some of the safety features with the trimmer first. So it takes about 5 minutes. So you just want to loosen up the alginate, because it's just going to trim a lot easier. Just soaking the bases. You can kind of start that process and then go kind of about getting everything together. So if you want to just come over, we're going to talk a little bit about the trimmer. Have you had any safety things on the trimmer?
No.
Okay. So ideally, always keep them unplugged unless you're going to use them. That's a good safety thing first. You have the ground fault outlet, so if it's not working, you may just have to hit the reset button first. So go ahead and plug it in. Always, 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 you know how I'm concerned about your eyesight. Safety glasses, always when you're doing it. Always going to use the safety shield also, but you can think about that stone, even when I was clipping it with the pliers, it goes everywhere. So make sure you have your safety glasses on. Always use the safety shield. So a couple things that you want to look at before you get started. This plate moves up and down, and then this little set screw sits it. So you don't know who used it before you, and you always want it at 90 degrees. So that's why you have this glass slab. So you're gonna look for this edge and this edge to meet up to it. So if I let it drop down, you can see how it's not even. So just bring the plate up to where you're at 90 and perpendicular, and then set your screw. Because if you start with it not perpendicular,
Something ain't right.
your model will not trim. Well, it moves as you kind of tighten it.
No, but it's like this.
It's crooked.
Oh, I see. Thanks. Okay, good. All right, so a couple other things. This is your water level. Always have that off unless you're using it also. So you want to have enough water so that you're trimming and the wheel stays moist. You don't want so much water that you feel like you're creating a flood. So when you turn it on, so it's a pretty aggressive wheel, pretty high grit. So, you know, be respectful of it. You don't, once you're coming to trim, focus on trimming. Don't get distracted with other things. I prefer if you not wear gloves. So the models aren't contaminated here. If you're in a clinic needing to do model trimming, you're going to disinfect the models first before you trim. I just don't want you getting a glove caught in there. Okay? We'll just turn on the water and see how it's kind of coming through. Sprayer is used for cleaning off. You can also fill a glass of water, put that on there to clean it off. Once the wheel is stopped, wait for it to stop. Don't think I should stick my hand in there and try to slow it down. It's an aggressive wheel, right? So you don't wanna, you only have so many layers of skin. You don't wanna leave it on there. So once the wheel stops, make sure you clean it with a brush. Couple other things. Also, take this part out, make sure there's not any dried up stone in there. There's also a reservoir down here. Pull that off. There's a spoon right here and this baggie right there. Use that to clean out any stone. Ideally, it's a lot easier to clean out when it's been wet and you've been using it before it turns into, you know, Mount Rushmore. We don't want it to get hard. So if someone's going to use the model trimmer right after you, have a discussion with them. Are you going to clean it up? So when Susan comes in here, our group is always going to leave them nice and clean. So just keep that in mind. Keep in mind, how long is it going to take me to set up? How long is it maybe going to take me to trim? Do I have enough time to clean up? Keep that all in consideration, because if we mess up the lab, things will have to change. So as long as we keep it clean. Model gloss is always kept down here. So remember, you want to start with a dry model. So if you had to get your model wet for some reason, add some extra stone, or you got it wet when you were using the sandpaper, rinsed it off, let it dry overnight or for a day before you put it in the gloss. About 20 minutes in there is probably good. I wouldn't leave it in overnight because you kind of would hate for it to start turning into mush. So 20 minutes is about good.
So what would we clean with the toothbrush?
The wheel.
So you just stick it on there?
Yeah, so you can just move the sheet around and just get the stuff off.
Okay.
If you're going to clean it right after you've used it and it's wet, usually the water will take care of it. So the wheels should always look like that. They should never be left where they look white. You're not using enough water. You don't want to be trimming without water. Okay. Any questions on the gloss? So it's probably going to be a few days before you get to the gloss, but just soak it. Once you don't have any more, you've sandpapered off all the little edges and stuff, then it goes in here. So this is your final step. And remember, you probably won't be getting to that till probably the end of November, I would guess. You can use this cloth, you could use nylons, you can use an old sock, I don't care. But it's really just kind of a nice arts and crafts. You just sit down and you make it all pretty. Okay, so we'll go back over here. Any
Sorry.
questions so far?
So far, so good.
All right. So lots of things to go over. So you're gonna start with a ruler and a little what are these things? Compass.
Oh, compass. It's a
Is
compass.
it compass?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a compass.
Compass. So ideally, each model is going to be about 1.25 inches. So a full set, if you measured it, it's going to be about 2.5. So these are all located in the top drawer along with the ruler. They're taped, but know that they kind of do move around a little bit. So I'm really going to trim a maxillary today and then just show you a couple things on the mandibular. So you're going to want to use pencil when you're marking it up. Easy to wash off so you don't have any marks on it. I'm going to make some marks with a marker so as I'm trimming you can see where I'm trimming to. So I'm going to just move this tray. Maybe set that right here. And this base could be a little bit thicker, but it'll work. So then, just so you can see it as I'm trimming, I'll just mark it up. Alright, so a couple other things you want to think about. You don't want to cut off anything that you're going to get graded on. So remember with the fold and the tissue, you want to get all those attachments so that you see them. So you don't want to shrink it so much that you've lost those attachments. You don't want to get too close to the trimmer and maybe trim away the facial edge of 8 or 9. So kind of, I say kind of work in processes. Going to reduce some, then I'm going to look at it, and then I'm going to reduce some more. I'm going to do one side and then the other side. So a couple of things. So you want to always make sure that you get the area behind the last molar and that molar area pad. So on your Typodons, it's easy to see. You can see the line. But if you didn't have it, I'm going to make mine just a little bit shorter. So I'm going to make kind of 3. So then I'm going to make a center line between 8 and 9. Let's see. You might want to do it first with your pencil. And it's just kind of connecting the dots. And then I'll just make it a little darker so that you can see it. So my finished line, ideally I'm going to probably bring it so I don't see that line anymore, but my first few cuts I'm going to bring it to that line so that I'm not so tight. Then my side cuts, I'm going to go parallel with my molars up to my canines, and then I'll mark my middle of the canine just for my heel cuts. All right, what you're gonna do first is you're gonna trim your maxillary. Get that completely done first. It's gonna make your mandibular cuts a whole lot easier because you're just gonna go ahead and occlude them and pretty much trim them together. It's gonna be a little bit different. You're not gonna have the angled cuts like you see on the maxillary. It's gonna be rounded. So whenever you have your models, make sure, right now you're working with impressions off a Typodon, so they're pretty perfect. But if you have patient that has a protruding premolar or protruding canine or protruding lateral, keep that in mind. You don't want to accidentally trim that one off. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, any questions on kind of marking up your models?
But we would just do that in pencil?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even this marker will come off, but you don't want to have to worry about having marker on your